Boyfriend, Teenage Love. Written by Vella Jamar. Narrated by Deja, Nance. Chapter 5. One day, Marcus and I were together, and he talked of how he was the toughest boy in the neighborhood, and that there wasn't a soul in our age group who could whip him. He bragged of whipping Smitty one time after he jumped on his brother Raymond. He really thought he was tough. He enjoyed beating up all the newcomers just to let them know how bad he was. He said after he whipped Smitty something awful, he ran home crying like a girl and he never bothered his brother again. I don't think he loved to fight, but he'd get pretty ugly if he felt he had to, especially when it came to defending his family. One Sunday afternoon, as Judy and I were walking down my favorite street, we saw Marcus and his family stuffed in their family car coming from church. We made eye contact as they drove by on their way home. I told Judy, "Watch Marcus go to the store so we can see him in his church clothes." In a matter of minutes, he hurried out of the car and went to the store. We burst into laughter as he showed off his attire and walked to the store as I had predicted. When he finished his ritual, he went back home to change before coming outside to play. I don't remember us visiting the clubhouse on Sundays during our first months together. All other days, the sky was the limit. He didn't care if we did have school the next day. Nothing stopped him from going to his clubhouse to either share his sexuality or whatever story he wanted to tell. He was beautiful on the outside. Years down the road, I'd tell him, if he could just get the inside to match the outside, he would have had it made. Judy asked me one day to come to Nora's house and help her babysit Nora's little boy, who she watched on occasion. I hated that she was the only one getting paid, but said yes. Nora's house was a couple of doors down from Marcus. As soon as she and her nasty husband left, I called Marcus. I told him we were alone at Nora's house babysitting and to bring his friend T, whom liked Judy. When he found him, they came and we made small talk while staring at each other. One of the two turned off all the lights, and we made our way to separate parts of the house. I don't remember if the poor boy we were supposed to be watching was asleep or not. Either Nora had ESP, or her and her husband forgot something. Within minutes, they opened the dark house that they had just left with all the lights on. She was pretty disappointed, to say the least. First, she told the boys they could leave. She then explained to us that she didn't want company, especially of the opposite sex, in her house while she was gone. We must have spoiled her evening. They did not go bowling after all. Judy and I left. Judy was disappointed that she wouldn't be getting paid. She had already made plans for that money. We met the fellows outside and they asked, what did Nora say to us? We told them she didn't want them in her house while they were away. Judy wasn't into giving it up, though. She would kiss T with his two top front teeth missing. That was her limit. She hadn't found anyone special to share herself with at that time. She went home while Marcus and I stole away to the underpass for a few moments before I went home so I wouldn't get locked out of the house. The next day, Judy and I went to 12th Street. Behind her back, Nora's nasty husband wanted to know, what were y'all doing in there with them lights off? He had been flirting with me since I met him a year earlier. I doubt if there was a young girl in the neighborhood he hadn't made a pass at. It was rumored that he got one teenager pregnant. When her mother found out, she ordered her to get an abortion. He used to always flirt whenever she wasn't looking. Nora would be the one to tell me years later more details about Marcus's father. Actually, it was quite a few details. She was a very long-winded lady. Marcus used to always wonder how I knew so much about his father and personal details of some of their family business. I told him things about his dad that he didn't even know, thanks to Nora and that big mouth of hers. We talked so much one time years later when Judy and I were visiting, Judy said, "You two are talking too much," and got up and left. Her son even got tired of all the yapping and put his $5 on the table and said, "Whenever y'all finish talking, here's my money to go to McDonald's." Actually, she talked, and I listened in amazement how bold their dad was. I jumped in here and there to make sure I understood certain details she was covering, but she had the floor. My ears were wide open when it came to anyone filling in details about the Ream family. Marcus was very curious to know who was telling me things about his father, but I never let on whom I was getting the information from. He'd listen to me tell a story about his pa as intently as I listened to him as he talked about his father. When I got to know Marcus's grandmother years later, she also got a kick out of talking about his father as well. She said even though he ran those streets a lot, he took care of his family's financial needs. She said he was a gambling man and that he was very bold. One time she shared, he told me to come and pick him up, and when I arrived, another woman was sitting on his lap. I felt uncomfortable as I continued waiting for him to wrap up. She said he was at the table getting his money on from a crap game. I believe is the game she said they were playing. She said she told him, "Now, Larry, I'm going to go." The obvious light of the party, he told her, "Hold on, Big Amma. I will be ready in a minute." As he continued winning more money, she said he was a good provider, but that he was the biggest male hooker she ever met. They were so close, she said, they used to have keys to each other's vehicle, and that on a number of occasions, instead of him going to the gas station to put gas in his own car, he would come to get her car, which was almost always full of gas, leaving his, which was always near empty. I think overall, with the exception of all the women he used to see, she was well pleased with him as a son-in-law. She said he had driven her car when he unfortunately drowned with her keys in his pocket, and that they had to come get her in order to get her car. It was near the end of school, and as it wrapped up, I signed up for summer school. I had been tripping all year long with my grades and knew I needed every extra credit I could obtain. Kennedy High is where it was being held that year. A few days after we got out of school, Judy banged on my door hollering, Trina had her baby, and that it was a boy. She had him in the Saint nick of time, being that we had just finished school. She went full-time right to the very end. She was in the 10th grade when she delivered little Alvin. He was most adorable and was named after his uncle Alvin. Judy was so excited. He was their first nephew, the first grandchild, and the first great-grandchild. Their whole family was ecstatic. She said that Trina was still at the hospital and would be home in a couple of days. She asked me to accompany her to Glenn's house, where she again told the good news, though not quite as loud as she had just screamed to me. She told his mother that Glenn's son was born and resting at the hospital, and to be sure to tell Glenn when he got home. His mother responded, "Okay, Judy," after she asked a few pertinent questions of being the new grandmother. About a week after Trina came home from the hospital, her, Judy, and I tarried around to 12th Street. It was my favorite block and where my handsome boyfriend lived. We went to visit Olita and Brenda. From there, we decided on a walk to the park. Brenda hung out with us sometimes, but that girl was off into her books. She was college-bound, plus had an exciting romance going with her own boyfriend. As we entered the park, two figures quickly vanished, one completely and the other, a young girl who went to sit on a bench close by. They left so quickly we did not have a chance to see the guy's face. We sat close to where we had first seen them and finished engaging in our small talk and laughing out loud about silly things girls laugh about. Brenda had a very outgoing personality and a keen sense of humor. For some reason, I kept looking at the girl sitting on the bench. It was as if she was waiting for us to go away. I did remember that there were two figures when we first entered the park. The one that disappeared vanished near the bench where we were sitting. There was a small hill behind where we sat. I don't know what compelled me, but I went up and looked down. Lo and behold, there was my boyfriend laid out on the ground. He didn't see me, and I went and whispered to the girls that Marcus was back there, pointing in the direction. Brenda led the way as we went on top of the small hill and started cracking up as he lay there listening to us trying to hide before he finally noticed us looking at him. He got up off the ground, shook the grass off, and had to laugh himself as he shined his beautiful smile and sat down on the bench where we were talking. While we were laughing, Brenda inquired, "Hey, whatever happened to you and Tandy?" Neither one of us responded and continued giggling. The poor girl was still sitting, obviously flushed with embarrassment. I'm sure Marcus was just trying to get some sex out of her, which was becoming of his being more intensely as we went along. Marcus walked with us back to 12th Street. I, Judy, and Trina then walked back to 11th Street from there. About 2 months into summer, Brenda gave Trina a baby shower. She received many gifts and was touched by the outpour of love. Most of the time, they got along pretty good as cousins. Other times, they went through spells of not talking. That was one of the good times. It was being rumored that I was pregnant, but it turned out to be one of many false alarms when my menstruation would trick me and move appearance dates without warning. I was not ready for a child in my life at that time. I think Trina wanted me to be pregnant so she wouldn't have to be the only mother. Their friend Maria, who lived down the street, whom they sometimes hung around, was a mother. That would have to be sufficient because me and Marcus were playing coochie and doing the wild thing, but he was the perfect athlete when it was time to jump up and stop his sperm from falling anywhere near my sacred parts, which he still insisted on hurting. We were not ready to be parents. I loved his ass for that jumping business he'd mastered. Being a parent was a job and looked like it took away all of your teenage freedom. I did not need baby mama drama at that point in my life. They weren't aware of the relationship I was having with Marcus and kept asking whom I could possibly have been pregnant by. I kept them in suspense for the moment, but eventually they found out. He wouldn't stay away. Marcus came a few days after the park incident, and I looked at him and asked, "Where's your park girlfriend?" "Ow, that is just someone I met, and she is not my girlfriend, you are." As he pulled me toward, and I pulled back as he lied, trying to make me feel better so he could get more sex. I don't know what it was about that boy. I had a hard time turning him away. He literally got away with murder in those beginning months. He always had a line, and I always fell for it. I had been with Marcus for the last 6 months. He had dominated the relationship right from the start. I don't remember turning him down even once when he wanted to engage. I think the only thing that ever stopped us from going at it is when my menstruation got in the way. The relationship slightly changed when I started hanging around Trina and Judy. As we moved into summer, I spent a lot of time with them. That meant I wasn't always available for Marcus when he came wanting to go to the clubhouse. We were really enjoying summer and the freedom of being out of school. I had signed up for summer school and knew I should have gone to make up for the mess I had made during my first year of high school, but after attending a few days, I quit. I promised myself I'd make it up the next summer. I was feeling really good about having friends back in my life. Lorraine was still my best friend, but we didn't get together as much as we once had when she lived in the hood or when we attended the same school. Trina loved hanging out with us, but sometimes she had a time finding a babysitter willing to give up the whole day just so she could be free. Her mother tried as much as she could on her off days, but after she went to work at 2:30 in the afternoon, it was difficult. The day was just getting started. Trina didn't want to push Alvin down the street in a buggy. I don't know why that's what buggies were for. Sometimes their big sister Sabrina volunteered to watch him, but she was a fast ass and had her own life. Their grandmother stepped in a few times and helped, but basically, I think they all wanted her to know that he was her responsibility and that she was going to have to adjust to the fact that she was now a mommy. Somebody in Judy's family decided to turn their garage into a clubhouse and went all out fixing it up. It couldn't have been Judy, who was one of the few still virgins. Something we should have all been until that very special someone came along. Some people are just hard-headed, teens in particular. It even had a bar in the corner. The bed actually stood on wheels, unlike the one in Juan's backyard where 2 mattresses sat on the floor with no frame to stand on. It also had a few warm blankets and a spread. Somebody meant to do some real business in there. I don't know when Marcus found out about their clubhouse, but when he did, it was on. I don't know who used it besides us and Trina and her date. He was as excited about being in there as he was about the one around the corner when we first began mating. He didn't have as much authority as he did at the one on his block. He was not able to put a chain and lock on the door keeping others out. Even though there were blankets inside, he still frequently showed up with his own. Sometimes he went to get everything all set up and then came across the street to get me to join him. He was still enjoying our bodies coming together. I was growing tired of sex, and at times only wanted to cuddle in his arms. We'd been at it about 7 months, and I was weary of his gibbering me with his wonderful to him sex organ. I became less interested in accommodating his sexual needs. I certainly had none of my own. I started pulling back at his every attempt at sex, and he was not taking the fact that I was beginning to occasionally refuse him when we were together very well. He didn't seem to appreciate or think I had the right to say no to him when it came to sex. Sometimes we left the blankets he stole from home in the new clubhouse for future use. I'm sure he didn't want his mother to see him coming home with blankets in his hand. He was always armed with covers. On a few occasions, he had me steal some out of our house. When I did, I always made certain to take them back home. I needed them to keep warm at night. Marcus started fancying up his wardrobe. One day we were alone, he said, "Boy, that Olita is something else." Their family always dressed well, and Olita paid close attention to everyone's clothes. She knew whether something was real or unreal. Marcus had bought what even I thought was a real leather coat. He said Olita walked right up to him, feeling on his coat, and asked, "Where did you get that pleather coat from?" He said he had everyone else convinced it was genuine. Not Olita. She was a real pretty girl who was in love with and loved by his brother Raymond since they were in kindergarten, some said. She was as cute as the movie star she was named after. There was a tacky white lady named Mona who had twins about 6 months older than Alvin. She lived directly across the street from Marcus and seemed to always need a babysitter between her black dates. Judy knew her first, and then I joined, and two began receiving the $1 per hour babysitting money. We looked forward to the 1st and the 15th to collect our childcare monies. She didn't even know if the hours we gave her were accurate. Though we were being truthful, she was practically broke on the 15th after she paid us. That's when she got her smaller welfare check. Sometimes we let her slide until the 1st. That meant more money to look forward to. One night she went out and we had the whole apartment to ourselves. That's a pretty dangerous thing to allow among teenagers, especially the ones who are courting. I believe some of the older folks referred to it back then. Marcus, who was a very perceptive young man, knocked on the door as soon as she left. He saw us go inside earlier while he was outside enjoying the warm summer night. We cuddled and were glad to be together. Judy's new love came next, and they went straight into the room, closing the door behind them. He was trying to take her virtue away from her. I don't know if she allowed him to. They stayed in there an awful long time. Between the two of us, we listened for the twins to cry. Most nights they slept right through the morning. Marcus wanted to get it on as usual. He was bold. I didn't want to with Judy and her friend in the other room. To me, that was a very private experience, and I wasn't about to do it on the couch, where either of them could have walked in at any moment. He said that they were not thinking about us, and were in there doing their own thing. I told him no, and that he would have to wait for another opportunity. He acted like he did not appreciate the word no. He was beautiful, and I was over head in love with him. He looked out of the window a few times towards his house. It was getting late, and I was happy just being in his arms. We lay on the couch in front of the window and fell fast asleep. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning when he woke up and asked what time it was. He grabbed his hat and ran to the side of his house to gain entrance before his mother realized him gone. I went back to sleep after watching him disappear towards his backyard. I think that was our first time spending an almost entire night together. And Judy and I left in the a.m. when Mona arrived. Judy and I were free to come and go as we pleased. To get money, we either babysat Mona's twins or Nora's son. It really depended on who was paying the most. Sometimes we strolled to Lisa's house just to get out of our own. She had a boyfriend who was a little on the heavy side, had a lowrider car, and a hilarious personality. I used to see him when Marcus and I first started seeing each other. He would be standing in front of his house on 13th Street while we were on our way to or from the clubhouse smoking a cigarette. We were at Lisa's one afternoon, and her boyfriend came over. He invited her to Burger King. It was new to our area, and neither Judy or I had ever been. He had already taken Lisa on a few occasions. We asked if we could tag along. Sure, they both agreed. We thought we were something riding in his lowrider. We didn't have any money. Daryl offered to buy us a Whopper. It was the juiciest burger I had ever tasted. He also bought us some fries and a drink. Wow, he must be rich, we exclaimed after he bought all of us food and drove us around in the cool summer breeze. After we enjoyed our delicious meal, he took us to the drugstore and bought us each a bag of candy and chips. We went back to 12th Street to hang out the rest of the day. It was a fun, hot summer as we found different things to get into. Every day we made our way to 12th Street as if it were the only place in the world to go. Everybody was enjoying the latest songs. Brick House, in particular, as each one of us felt we were the perfect 36, 24, 36. Oh, what a winning hand. Lionel Richie sung about. Olita for sure, as she dressed in nice outfits each day. And Judy thought she had the best shape in the world and loved every bit of attention she received at anyone making mention of that big behind she possessed. Trina was small, but didn't mind showing off her thin legs. She hadn't gained an ounce with the birth of Alvin. I also enjoyed showing off my little shape, which Marcus had greatly contributed to. We had our hair fixed cute each day, and we all knew we looked good. I cut a lot of my ugly long pants, which looked a lot better after I turned them into shorts, rolling them up at the bottom, making me look extra sexy. Marcus was so skinny, I don't know if I ever saw that boy trying to sport them bony legs of his in short pants. He always dressed in several long john pants and shirts under his clothes, even during the hot summer months. He said his grandfather said you could save yourself from a lot of ailments, such as arthritis, if you kept warm all of the time no matter what season it was. Marcus knocked on the door early one morning, before I had a chance to go over Trina and Judy's house, making sure he claimed me before anyone else captured my attention. I had on my cute hot shorts as we walked around to the clubhouse, which he still loved and adored. He was still cute and sexy, and still wanting to share his sexuality more than he did his stories at that point during our time together. He wasn't declaring his love for me as much as he once had, but still said it sometimes as he released, meaning he still loved me sexually. He was still my baby, and I guess I was still his as well. Later on that day, while hanging out on 12th Street, Trina and Judy began repeating a specific entry I had written in my diary about one of my encounters with Marcus, laughing as they were telling it. I knew I hadn't shared it with them. I knew for sure Marcus wouldn't have talked about something so personal. I asked how they knew about it, and they screamed, "Your big mouth mama!" My mother talked a lot. She had resumed speaking to them since we had become friends again. I was mad and walked home. To my surprise, my mother was sitting in a chair close to the door, her head buried in my diary, laughing as she read each line. She thought it was so funny as she stayed glued to the words. She didn't even bother trying to put it away, even after I walked through the door. I asked her for it, and she said no very casually and kept on reading. Anger welled in my body as I stood there looking at her laugh at my most precious thoughts. I felt like I was being exploited and had to get it away from her. She was my mother, and I couldn't very well hit her. Neither could I snatch it, though I wanted to. I was not going to risk God's greater punishment of being that disrespectful. I never had the nerves to raise my hand at my mother, maybe gotten a little mad and said something out of line. She had birthed me, and my grandmother warned on more than a few occasions when we were younger and once lived with her, "Tandy, if you don't respect anything else, respect your mama's shoes." God warned to respect and honor your parents. Ephesians 6 verse 2. Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that your days may be long and that it may go well with you in the land. At the same time, he warned parents, do not provoke your children to wrath. Ephesians 6 verse 4. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Unable to control myself, I went into her bedroom. I had to release the anger that continued to rise. Roth, one preacher, described it. I didn't know what to do. I looked around, and there stood a mirror. I can't remember what I grabbed, but whatever it was, I threw it with such might that it shattered into a million pieces, crumbling to the floor. The loud noise made her jump out of the chair. She hurried to investigate the commotion after she put my diary in her purse and in the kitchen closet. When she discovered the damage, she hollered, "Go clean up that mess." I grabbed my diary out of her purse and then went to clean. I've been emotional as long as I can remember, and though I was crying, it felt good to have released that tension. I saw Trina and Judy as I took the broken mirror pieces and put them in the garbage can. I was no longer in a mood to socialize and went upstairs and found a new hiding place for my sacred thoughts. No one knew that I had been raped again, or the intricate details of the ordeal which were recorded in the diary. It was the second time I had experienced the rotten nightmare. No one except God, me, the punks who'd done it, and my diary. Though the punks were telling everyone in town, of course, not the way in which they forced the violation. It was an act of force, not choice. None of their egos bothered explaining that as they destroyed my reputation all over town. Marcus was starting to hear the rumors, but he didn't know what had actually happened. I didn't care to talk about it. I don't believe with all the giggling she was doing that she had gotten to that specific entry. I was still in shock that she read and shared my personal thoughts, most of which were about losing my virginity the last 7 months with Marcus in that clubhouse of his. I stayed in my room the rest of the afternoon. Summer was drawing to an end, and we had to get ready for another school year. Judy, with that loud mouth of hers, would be joining us. As everyone anticipated the first day of school, they were bragging about their new school clothes. I felt out of place as they relished in talking about their fresh wardrobe, remembering my rags from the previous year. I did not feel like going through the trauma of being without decent attire again. My mother was a single parent with 8 kids and no financially helpful ex-husband. She was without employment most of the time. Looking back, I really don't know how she did it, but thank God that she hung in there with all of us. Like her mother before her, she did what she had to do with what she had to do it with. It must have been hard trying to stay sane under those conditions. At the beginning of the previous school year, my Uncle Stennis and his wife, Aunt Eloise, loaned her $75 to help buy clothes for 6 kids. We were ever grateful, but it did not stretch very far at the department stores. The father was still angry for having to give up the house. At least that's what my mother said. The beginning of each school year was always stressful as we wondered if he was going to come through with purchasing clothes. Hardly any one of the remaining 6 financially dependents were able to get as much as an outfit from him the year before. Though my youngest sister kept trying. She used to wait for him to come out of the bar and get as much money as he had left in his pocket to give her. I had the nerves to try it one time, and one time only, all for him to tell me don't ever come to the bar again. I was on my own. Something hit him one day. I don't know what it was, but it sure felt good at the moment. He gave his firstborn daughter a single-signed check, his license, and his truck to take us to Hilltop Mall to buy clothes. Happy he wasn't going that time, I jumped in back of the truck to go along and purchase some clothes. We shopped to our heart's delight. The bill reached nearly $1,000. We were almost out of the store when the clerk decided that because his license had expired a day before, we would have to put the clothes on layaway and have him pick them up when he got his new license. We were so disappointed. I knew it was too good to be true, though we tried to remain hopeful. When he came a couple of days later with JCPenney bags, we were excited. We took the bags in the house and tore into them looking for our new clothes. It was disheartening to say the least after we opened each bag, only to discover that they all belonged to my brother, his first son. He only honored layaway slips that had his clothes in them. Nobody else received garments. How disappointed the rest of us were. We didn't know what we were going to do. 5 of us were still in the same dilemma that we were the previous year. Old rags to wear to school. I felt sorry for my younger siblings, but from that moment on, I made up my mind that I would handle the responsibility of getting my own clothes. I would not be in the position again of having to ask their father for clothes, or anything else I needed for that matter. I had completely relinquished all rights of ownership to him, after he'd told me I couldn't go shopping months earlier when he ordered me out of his truck. Determined with taking matters of obtaining my own clothes, I contacted some of my mother's brothers and sisters seeking help of any kind they could possibly send my way. One uncle told me to see if your father will buy you some clothes, and I will reimburse him later. When I called the father and told him what my uncle said, he yelled, "I don't need nothing from no poor-ass uncle of yours," and slammed down the phone. My uncle, along with his lovely wife, kept his word and sent me a few outfits in the mail. One pair of pants was so small I had to give them to Trina's tiny being. My dear Aunt Jerry loaned me $20, which I could have earned if I had just kept up grades on my report card. She had paid good money for high marks since we were in elementary school. It took me a whole year to pay her back. When I did, she marked PD in her private little book, which meant paid. I was feeling good about me, and I was not going to do my sophomore year in some tacky clothes as I had my freshman year. I don't remember when I thought to do it, but I started going in stores with old clothes on and coming out in new ones. I knew it was wrong, but I rationalized that I wasn't stealing, simply trading. I don't know what gave me the courage, but each time I got away with it, I was braver the next trade. I swapped wonderful new clothes for my rags. I did it about 5 times, opting between JCPenney, Mervyn's, and Capwell's on a few occasions before school began. It allowed me to start the year with a funky new wardrobe. When Christmas, Easter, or any other occasion came, I didn't bother trying to get money from anyone to buy clothes. I just went and did my trade business. Even if I had only 15 cents to catch the bus to the mall, when I finished trading clothes, I would go hang out in the bathroom at Macy's until I saw someone I felt comfortable enough to ask, "Could I please borrow the 15 cents bus fare to go home?" One time, a white lady with an obvious sense of humor, to my surprise, responded, "Does that mean you are going to pay me back?" We laughed as she reached into her coin purse and handed me the nickel and dime bus fare. When my mother first noticed me in new clothes, she inquired where I'd got them from. She knew she hadn't bought or given me any money to buy them. She also knew that I was her ex-husband's least favorite offspring, and that it was most likely I hadn't got money from him either. I explained to her that I traded them, going in old and coming out new. She seemed a little shocked and said what she had to say of the matter. I listened and was still determined to get me some more. She just nodded her head from that point on whenever I entered with a new outfit on. I didn't care. I was going to have some new clothes and confidence. My mother would talk on the phone for hours with my grandmother and told her every detail of everything that happened in our house. If she wasn't on the phone with my grandmother, then she talked to one of 2 aunts or whomever else she chose to chat with. If you ever got on the phone with my grandmother after she found out something you did, which was not pleasing to her, you'd be stuck for hours listening to her well-intentioned sermon. She didn't care about the telephone bill at the moment and knew it would get paid one way or another. She was totally dependent on God to take care of all of her business. He had brought her a mighty long ways. All she cared about was getting her point across, on the phone or in person. She kept you glued listening, whether you wanted to or not, to all she had to say. My sweet grandmother was full of wisdom. She never took anyone's side. She'd just go straight into her wisdom trance with, "Now, Tandy, it's nice to be nice," or "God don't like ugly," and her favorite, especially if you weren't busy doing something meaningful, "An idle mind is the devil's workshop." A lot of times she'd just give an analogy of what she was trying to get across. That particular time called for the one about dear old Aunt Laura. She told me when she was a little girl, she once went to live or visit her aunt who was a school teacher. She said her aunt would put money on the floor on purpose and then throw her head in the air and walk over it. She said she didn't want to be branded as a thief, and she too would throw her head in the air and walk by, just as Aunt Laura had. She reinforced, God don't like ugly of any kind. They just didn't understand. I was not stealing. I was simply trading and looked good in each and every one of my traded outfits that I promised to pay back one day, as soon as I hit the jackpot, literally. I loved my grandmother and knew what she was telling me was right. I appreciated her taking out the time to share her wisdom with me and took in every word. I kept it close to my heart for future use. But at that time, I was going to have a nice wardrobe. I was going to look as good as everyone else. That was a promise I'd made to myself. I was a lot more confident that year than I was in the ninth grade, and vowed that I would not be the tackiest dressed or even close to it that year. I proudly hung each new outfit up in my closet as I got off the bus after conquering another victorious trade. The store had plenty, and probably didn't even miss them, I rationalized. As we wrapped up the summer, everybody was excited about starting the new school term. Showing off new clothes had always been a tradition of starting the new year. I was not going to be left behind. I can't remember when exactly Marcus told me he was going to go to Richmond High for his junior year. I was not surprised that he was transferring from Salesian. He didn't go into any details as to why, just that he was going to a new school. His brother Raymond, along with Judy, would be starting Harry Ailes with us. Alita would be launching her first year of junior high. Judy and I wrapped up the summer with a few more babysitting jobs, collected our monies, and were ready to start the year with cash in our pocket. We would no longer be available to watch kids an entire day, unless it was on the weekend. We were ready for an exciting new year at school. This has been Boyfriend, Teenage Love, written by Vella Jamar, narrated by Deja Nance.